Welcome to my channel where we share stories of HOA Karens getting what they deserve. Our next Reddit post is from a user. I'm a bit embarrassed to admit this, but it happened recently and I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Our HOA president is somewhat of a Karen. She is super controlling and has made many of our lives miserable with her nitpicking and petty fines. For example, she fined someone for having a badminton net in their front yard. Another neighbor was fined because his grass was too long, and then he got fined again because he cut it too short. That same neighbor had to remove a shed because his roof had caved in, and then he got fined again for having an unsightly pile of dirt where the shed had been. The HOA president has also repeatedly fined my neighbors for having basketball hoops in their driveway, even though there are no rules against it. She's just a huge killjoy and takes great pleasure in ruining people's fun. Well, one day I noticed that she put up some sort of sign in her front yard. It looked like it might be a political sign, so I walked over to take a closer look. And wouldn't you know it? She had put up a sign asking people to vote against a local referendum. This referendum would allow residents to have accessory dwelling units in their backyard, which are basically small houses that you can rent out. They're really popular here in Portland, Oregon, and many people are considering voting in favor of it because housing is ridiculously expensive, and we're all sick of the homeless situation. Anyway, I pointed out to my neighbor that she shouldn't have a sign in her front yard. She said that it was only temporary and that she took it down the day after the election. I said that it doesn't matter if it's temporary. The rules are the rules. But secretly, I was really hoping that someone would run for HOA president against her in the next election. Fast forward a few months, and the HOA held their annual meeting. At the end, they announced that since there were no other nominees, the current board members would remain in place for another year. Then HOA Karen gets up to give her president's report, and she starts off by talking about how much money the HOA has collected in fines this year, which I guess is what she thinks is her greatest accomplishment. But then she starts talking about the recent referendum and says that it was a shame that so many residents did not vote the way she wanted them to. She actually tried to use her position as HOA president to tell people how they should vote. She said that it would have been nice if everyone had voted to keep the neighborhood the way it is now, implying that we should keep things the way they are now, so that she can continue being a power-tripping control freak. Everyone in attendance started laughing, including the people on the HOA board, and I could see that Karen was turning bright red. She tried to keep a straight face and actually told us that the board was considering ways to limit campaign materials in the neighborhood because it was unsightly. My neighbors and I all started cracking up, and the meeting ended shortly after that. I haven't heard Karen mention anything about the election since. Maybe she's finally learned her lesson, but I kind of doubt it. Our next Reddit post is from another user. A woman down the street had a massive oak tree in her front yard. It was probably the biggest tree in the neighborhood, and it was beautiful. One day, a storm came through and broke off a large branch that fell onto her driveway. She put up a sign that said, "Beware of falling branches." A few days later, HOA Karen sends her a letter saying that she had to remove the sign because it was unsightly. My friend argued that it was a safety hazard, and not removing it could result in serious injury or worse. HOA Karen replied that the sign was unsightly and had to go. So my friend waited until HOA Karen came outside and saw the branch still lying in her driveway. Then she sent her a picture of it and said, "What do you want me to do with this?" Karen lost it. But the moral of the story is that if you have an HOA Karen in your neighborhood, you better watch out for flying monkeys. One of our moderators, You the Red Quill, shared this story, so let me read it for you. An elderly couple had lived in their home for nearly 30 years. Their HOA Karen wanted them to paint their house because it needed a fresh coat of paint. She specifically requested that they paint it white. Karen had been requesting this for weeks, so the old man decided to get it done. When the painter finished, Karen came over to inspect the work. The old man was very proud. He thought he'd done a good job. But when Karen saw the color, she immediately began screaming. Apparently, the color was slightly off. White is apparently not a color in the HOA Karen universe. Because of this, the old man had to pay $2,500 in fines. He ended up selling the house in foreclosure because he couldn't afford the fines. Down in the comments we have this story from you Sassafras. My mum had an HOA Karen as a neighbor. We live in Florida, so my mom had a pool in her HOA Karens complex. The pool area was supposed to be strictly for residents only. However, one Saturday morning, my mom opened her back door and saw two kids from down the street playing in her pool. My mom yelled at them to get out of the pool, but they refused. And mind you, these kids are like 12 or 13 years old. Mom goes back inside, calls the police, and tells them that there are some kids in her pool that refuse to leave. The cops show up and ask the kids to leave, and they do without any fuss. HOA Karen comes running out of her house yelling at my mom that she's causing a disturbance and that she needs to stop calling the cops over nothing. My mom tells her that the kids were in her pool and she asked them to leave, and HOA Karen tells my mom that the cops should have talked to her first before kicking the kids out. My mom says, "I called the cops. They came and the kids left. What more do you want?" Karen's response, "You should have talked to me first." As Karen walks away, my mum yells after her, "I don't have to talk to you about trespassing kids." And Karen turns around and says, "They're my kids. You should have talked to me first." My mum deadass said, "If you're such a Karen, why are you raising somebody else's kids?"